start very soon. We have a little different style today. The Monday, we had over 200 people for the Hong Kong panel, which we ordered only 160 chairs, but we had 20 people, so many people did not find chairs. So this time, we changed the format, have all the tables, so you can eat on the table, and there's a different style of the food that normally have pizza. I think you must be tired of pizza, so we have sandwiches today. We are very, very delighted that we have a very distinguished panel discussion today on North Korean issues and also the relationship between South Korea and North Korea, and also Koreans' relationships with regional countries, China, Japan, and some other countries. We have two speakers from a little further away. One arrived last night from Seoul, Professor Lee Sung-sin, and he did survey research on the public opinions about North Koreans thinking of South Koreans thinking of North Koreans and other issues, unification issues. Then we have a Council Journal of Republic of Korea from San Francisco, Mr. Park Jung-yoon. In fact, people are not fully familiar with Council Journal Park because he came last year, gave a presentation talking about South Korean relationship with the United States. We had a very good audience last year, so he's coming back again. Then we have our own very, very, very distinguished ambassador, Chris Hill. In fact, personally, for me, it's so important we have Ambassador Hill on the campus because wherever I go in Asia, people always said, "Oh, you are a colleague to Ambassador Hill." That's a big, big honor for me. In fact, we have a local, ambassador at the university presence. Any person in the world come to Denver to see me always said, "Is Ambassador Hill aware of our presence here?" So he is also not only ambassador to South Korea, he's also the head of a U.S. delegation on the Six Party Talks as Secretary of State for East Asia. So he is an expert. Western expert on Korean issue. You went to his office, he had all the photos with all those big names related to Korea. So he will make responses to the presentation made by Dr. Lee. So without further ado, please join me to welcome the panel and welcome Dr. Lee to start the presentation. You can start.
Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Lee. Since we don't have much time, I'll just start right away. Let me give you my story. I used to study at the University of Iowa. It was 2002. Do you know what happened in 2002? World Cup. Do you follow soccer? There was a World Cup in South Korea, and I was feeling miserable in Iowa. I was not watching it. And one day I had a lunch with my classmates. And somehow it was all Asian. One from Taiwan, the other one from India, including South Korea. Do you see the common factors of these three countries, South Korea, Taiwan, and India? All Asia, and they used to be the colony of the imperial powers. They experienced the civil war in 20th century, and they have arch enemies. Taiwan has the mainland China, India has Pakistan, South Korea, North Korea. Arch enemies with nuclear weapons. So we were having lunch of talking about soccer, and I don't know why. I just asked my Taiwanese friend, if there is a soccer match between your old the imperial colonial master, Japan, and the China, which country would you support? Can you guess his answer? Which country would you support if you have two archangels? He said he doesn't care. I didn't know back then, but he was not ethnic Chinese. He was the descendant of the native Taiwan. Taiwan has very weird history. He was the descendant of native Taiwanese. So he doesn't care about what is happening between Taiwan and China. And I asked my Indian friend, if there is a soccer match between Britain and Pakistan, which country would you support? And surprisingly, he thought like 15 seconds and he said, probably Pakistan. That was very surprising. And I asked myself, what if there is a soccer match between North Korea and Japan? I think we must have some Koreans here. Do we have Korean? Please raise your hand. Yes. Which country would you support if there is a soccer match between North Korea and Japan? I don't have to ask this because it's too easy question for Koreans. In a heartbeat, I would say North Korea. And so it was too easy. It's not interesting. And when I came back to South Korea, and I started working as a pollster. This is an actual polling done by Seoul National University. We asked if there is a soccer match between North Korea and the United States, which country would you support? So it's really better than the North Korea versus Japan. Our arch enemy versus our ironclad ally. Always South Korea choose North Korea over the United States. It's not that we don't like United States. It's not like we don't hate North Korea. We hate North Korea very much. But whenever there is this survey started back in 2007. In 2007, 81% of South Korea says that they would support North Korea over United States. Isn't that amazing? We fought war against North Korea back in 1950, and still people choose North Korea over United States. And the number of people who support North Korea, as you can see, is decreasing. But still, over half of people says that they will support North Korea. Just last month, based on this old survey, I made another survey question. This time it's a little bit more extreme. I'm very slow, I'm sorry. This is the very last one. Yes. I asked if there is a war between North Korea and Japan, which country do you think South Korea should support? It's really extreme, but you can see in the same line of the former one. And as you can see, when I asked the same question, 45% of South Korea says that we should support North Korea for Japan. only 15% of South Korea says that we should help Japan. For South Koreans, this number is interesting, but it's not shocking. We can understand this. But this statistic make a news article on Newsweek because it's so shocking for the foreigners. This is how South Koreans think about North Korea. It doesn't mean that we love North Korea. We have very strongly mixed feeling about North Korea. As a researcher, I work for the Korea Institute for National Unification. We call it KINU. And one of my job is to brief to our guests about the South Korean public opinion about North Korean unification. And I have two versions of answers about our feeling toward North Korea. The simple version is that North Korea to South Koreans is like a troublemaker in the family, a black sheep. Every family has one, right? It's universal, not just Korean thing. Everyone I ask, every foreigners, every Americans understand this analogy. You must have one in your family. If you have one, if you don't have one, probably you are very lucky or you are the black sheep yourself. My father thinks I'm the black sheep. And North Korea is just like that. We hate North Korea. North Korea brought shame to our family name. It doesn't support itself. It's very violent. And still, we don't want to see North Korea beaten down by some neighboring countries. That's how South Korea feel about North Korea. And I see some South Koreans nodding their heads in order to read my statement. Thank you. I have to go back to the first slide. This is better. So I give you the little bit more complex version of the answer. How South Koreans think about North Korea. I divide South Koreans into 4 groups. I name them as pragmatist, liberalist, realist, and isolationist. Realist. They don't believe in cooperation between two Koreas. And they believe in somehow we have to go to war, we have to wait out until North Korea implode. They don't believe North Korea will ever change. And they will never give up their nuclear weapon. That's realist view. Sunshine policy, engagement with North Korea will never work. North Korea, their true intention is not peace. They won't take over the South Korea to build their own communist country. Whatever Kim Jong-un says is a lie. Only way for the unification is the regime change. That's realist view. That's one traditional conservative view in South Korea. Then in the other extreme, we have liberalists. They believe North Korea can change. And if we handle it correctly, North Korea will give up nuclear weapons. And of course, they support the engagement, Sunshine policy. And they believe North Korea want not just nuclear weapon and domination of Korean Peninsula, they want peace and prosperity. Kim Jong-un says so, that he can be trusted. Only way for unification is peaceful dialogue and compromise. So that's the other end of the spectrum. But there are 2 more groups, pragmatists and isolationists. Pragmatists want to take advantage of North Korea. They understand that North Korea would not easily change. But if you might be able to tame North Korea to South Korea's benefit, they care about the interest and benefit of South Korea. They don't care about the human rights of North Korea. Sunshine policy can be profitable to South Korea. It might not work, or it might work. They don't care. But there is they acknowledge that there is a possibility the sunshine policy would increase our benefit. And they believe that they know that it is dangerous to trust North Korea and Kim Jong-un, but with enough caution, we can handle North Korea and Kim Jong-un to our advantage. Peace talks are good because it's cheap, it doesn't cost us money. But we don't have to rule out sanctions or other aggressive measures. So they just don't care about North Korea or unification. They care about the national interest or personal gain. That's pragmatic view. The last one is isolationist. It's a small group, but very fastly growing. They just don't care. For them, North Korea is just another country, another foreign country. They don't see North Korea as for the unification partner. North Korean nukes are terrible, but North Korea is just another foreign country. Sunshine policy is better than the war, as long as it doesn't interfere with our way of lives. Sometimes isolation is very similar with the realist. The difference is that realists hate North Korea. Isolationists, they despise North Korea. Those are very different feelings. Whatever Kim Jong-un says, we should not waste our time talking to him. They just don't care. If possible, South Korea and North Korea have better go separate ways. They prefer peaceful coexistence if that is possible. They don't think unification is possible. They don't think the unification is a good idea. And if possible, if we can maintain our way of life, they would prefer separation. So, question is, do we want unification? If you ask South Koreans if they want unification, or unification is necessary, probably they will say yes. Because unification is a moral question in South Korea. They would not give you the honest answers. It's not easy for South Koreans to say that I object to unification, because that's like I'm a bad guy. So I have another way of asking the question. If South and North can peacefully coexist without war, then unification is not necessary. I gave them this statement and asked them if they agree or disagree with the statement. I started this question in 2016. I measured 4 times. And as you can see, the number of people who prefer coexistence are increasing very steadily. Between 2016 and 2019, there were many things happening between North and South Korea. North Korea, they didn't, especially in 2017, we were almost at the brink of war. But as you can see, the trend has been changed. So we are finding very steady trend of South Koreans preparing peaceful coexistence over unification. Since we don't have much time, I will speak the most of the North Korean thing. I will go to the current issues. Korea-US alliances. I asked South Koreans if they believe we need US forces in South Korea. There were 2 questions. Do you think we need US forces in South Korea before the unification and after the unification? 91% of people says that we need US forces before the unification. How about after unification? Only 54.1%. So half of South Koreans believe that US should leave South Korea after the unification. So we can make a 2-by-2 table with these 2 questions. So 38% of South Koreans think that US forces should leave after unification. They must stay in the South Korea till the unification, and then after that they should leave. 53% believe that US FA should stay even after the unification. So there is South Koreans, to South Korean minds, there is some conflict about the role of US forces in South Korea. Some people believe about half of the South Korea believe that US forces is protecting South Korea. And some South Korea believe that South Korea and US are allies, the partner of the allies, protecting not just South Korea, protecting the peace and the order of Asian region. So I think that's why we have the divided opinion about the necessity of US forces. This is very hot topic in South Korea. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this issue. South Korea is paying money for the US forces. I think that's fair. You are sending your troops in South Korea and you are protecting South Korea from the North Korea. So we have to pay for it. So I think that's fair, and we are paying a lot of money. President Trump asked to increase that money for 5 times, from $1 billion to the $5 billion. That's extreme, right? So I asked, do we have to pay more, or stay the same, or pay less? Only 3.7% of Korea says that we have to pay more. 96% says that either we should pay less or stay the same. So regardless of the ideology, political party support, age, the gender, regardless of those variables, South Korea soundly reject the idea of paying more. You don't see any public opinion survey question like this. Donald Trump united South Korea. That's very rare. But we have to look at the next question. It's not official yet, but United States government is asking South Korea to send our Navy ships to the Hormuz. And I asked, do you think we should send our Navy to the Hormuz to help the United States? And it's half and half. Half of South Koreans said yes, we can send our Navy. So isn't it strange? We don't want to pay money. What we want to pay, we are willing to send our troops in Gulf region, which is very dangerous. And we don't want to go to war with Iran because we are buying oil from Iran. And I have to look at these two questions together to understand how South Korea feels about the Korea-US alliances. I believe it's not just about money. I think it's about the attitude of the Americans asking money to South Korea. South Korea is very rapidly growing. South Korea is now a developed country. South Korea is rich. We have powerful enough to protect ourselves, but we don't feel like we are being respected by our neighboring countries. So we don't know how rich and powerful we are, and I don't think the neighboring countries don't understand how rich and powerful South Korea is. And South Korea is kind of soul-searching the procedure. But we are resetting our role as a partner for the US alliances. So if you ask us nicely, we are willing to do you nice things. But if you want to increase the money for 5-fold, we don't like the idea. So it's not that South Koreans hate the United States. So I will just summarize how South Koreans feel about the neighboring countries. South Korea love United States. We hate Japan. We are afraid of China. We really don't care about the Russia. we have very strongly mixed feeling about North Korea. Next item is Japan. How much we hate Japan. I'm sorry, but that's true. I know that there's some Japanese people here, but I'm a scientist, I cannot lie. Probably you know that there is a trade war between South Korea and Japan. And Japan did the first move. They banned some key materials for the South Korean semiconductor industry. And the South Korean President Moon Jae-in decided to terminate the GSOMIA, it's the Military Information and Intelligence Sharing Act. And I asked if that measure was right. The question was, conflict between Korea and Japan is intensifying regarding Japan's recent regulation on export to Korea. What do you think should be the response of the Korean government regarding this issue? 71% of South Korea says that we have to be more aggressive, more than termination of GSOMIA. And 29% said we have to make a compromise with Japan. 71%. South Korea is a very divided country. 71% is a very high number. And even the conservative parties who really hate the current president of South Korea, even those conservative party supporters believe that we have to use the more aggressive measures against Japan. Termination of GSOMIA, do we support it or not? 72% of South Koreans, they support termination of GSOMIA. So that's almost the consensus of Korean society. Party support, I divide the response by the party support. Liberty Korea is a conservative party of South Korea who hates the President Moon Jae-in. Even the conservative supporters believe that Moon Jae-in's decision to termination of GSOMIA was the right move. But that's not the whole picture. I asked the next question. Reinstatement of GSOMIA. There are arguments insisting that Korea should also withdraw termination of GSOMIA. If Japan were to withdraw its measures to regulate exports to Korea, what is your opinion on this? If Japan restored its old status quo, do we have to reinstate GSOMIA? And about half of the South Koreans, 55% says that yes, if Japan terminate their export ban, we can reinstate GSOMIA. I think that's very hopeful picture for the future. There are some people who believe even if Japan terminate their export ban, we should continue to terminate GSOMIA. But majority of South Koreans says that we must continue to talk with Japan and find the ways of the collaboration and cooperation. Summit. Just a few days ago, the President Moon Jae-in met the Shinzo Abe, and South Koreans believe that Japan, the leaders of Japan and South Korea should meet and talk about the trade war. So that's why I asked this question: how much we hate. This question is about North Korea and also Japan. How South Koreans feel about those two countries. And again, when I divide those responses by the party support, even the conservative Liberty Korea supporters, they choose North Korea. You know, the Liberty Party supporters, they believe North Korea is the root of all the evil on earth. They don't believe that cooperation with North Korea is possible, but they would support North Korea over Japan. That's how strong they're feeling. Why? Because we believe we are still afraid of Japan. I often say these things to my foreign colleagues. What do you think South Koreans feel more afraid of? Nuclear North Korea or nuclear Japan? Which one would be worse for South Korea? Of course, the nuclear Japan would be much worse than nuclear North Korea for South Korea. Yeah, it's just hypothetical situation, but that's why we want to contain North Korea the nuclear weapon. If it comes to the Japan rearming itself with nuclear weapon, that would be a nightmare for the South Korea. And we still believe that the Japan could be a military threat to the South Korean safety. That's why we still have a negative feeling towards Japan. Okay, I think that's my time. So I want to give you more time to question and answer. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you for the very precise presentation. In fact, Dr. Lee prepared 70 slides. He sent all 70 to me, so I said you can use maybe only very small fraction of that because we don't have time. He did really good to preserve time. Now we have our own Ambassador Hill to make some responses to his remark. Do you want to go to the podium or you want the...
Or I could do it here. I mean,
okay,
it is
whatever you like.
Okay, I'll do it here.
Make sure the mic comes up.
Yeah. And so how much time do you want me to take? For 10 minutes, okay. All right, well, first of all, Dr. Lee, this was a really interesting way of looking at the problem. By the way, I liked your opening about who would they favor in a soccer tournament, because I had the experience of sitting with the Serb dictator Milosevic and discussing the upcoming French-Croatian World Cup match, and I thought the Serbs would definitely want the French to win because they, by the way, I don't usually like using the word hate, but they do hate the Croats. And but you know, actually, he was very much in favor. Really wanted the Croatians to beat the French. So a lot of kind of similarities going on, and I think different layers of psychology going on. So I think it was a very interesting issue. On the question, first of all, I have not seen this idea of taking the realists, liberals, pragmatists, and isolationists. I did have some trouble with differentiating realists and pragmatists, and I suspect there's a lot of crossover there. Someone being realistic one day might be pragmatist the next day. So I don't think these are immutable divisions among those groups. But this question of do they want unification, I think is the key question, and I think you've really gotten much closer to the answer than we've had. I would like, though, if you could tell us a little, how does this compare with, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago? What does a time series look like on the issue of unification? The issue of U.S. troops, I think, is also very interesting, and I think what you're trying to say is, to some extent, it's kind of how we ask. If, for example, we want South Korea to go to the Straits of Hormuz to participate in a military action, the South Koreans might not be so excited about that prospect. If they want to go to Straits of Hormuz to assist in maintaining stability, maintaining oil supplies, that would be a kind of different attitude on the South Korean part. And by the way, a different attitude on my part too. So I think how we ask and how we approach South Korea is very key. But on the issue of U.S. troops in South Korea, I think that it's a very interesting question about what South Koreans would want to see after unification. Now, I'm of the view, and maybe this is not supported by the majority of South Korean people, that having U.S. troops and being seen as a U.S. ally has been very leveraging for the South Koreans. It's kind of, when South Korean diplomats walk into some office in Europe or something, European Foreign Ministry somewhere, the Europeans understand, hey, this is a very key American ally. The Americans, after all, have almost 30,000 troops there. I think it kind of helps South Korea on this desire to be taken seriously. But I see that the interest in U.S. troops drops almost 50% when the North Korean threat goes away. I suspect this is also a function of if U.S. troops on the peninsula are seen as third country contingencies, i.e. if the U.S. indicates, as Rumsfeld once sadly did in 2005, that somehow we need U.S. troops in South Korea because we need to protect against or prepare for some kind of military operations against China, I would think the 54% might actually go down to 0 if that's the impression. It would be interesting to see what the corresponding numbers are in the U.S. Like, I think right now, if you ask the question, should we have troops in South Korea, the answer probably among Americans it isn't 91%, but it's something high. But if you said, once the North Korean issue goes away, should we maintain troops in Korea, I think the numbers go even much further below 54%. My own view is U.S. troops in South Korea are stabilizing not only to the Korean Peninsula, but to the broader region. And I'm worried whether we could sustain U.S. troops in the event that the North Korean problem goes away. And if I were South Korean, I might be inclined to see that 54 number go up. Burden sharing, I mean, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just be honest. It has been grossly politicized by the current U.S. administration. I mean, if you ask the average American about what we're doing, how our troops are being handled in South Korea, most Americans have no idea that much of the infrastructure has been built by the South Koreans. I mean, even the new infrastructure down in Pyeongtaek, as we move the forces from Yongsan down to Pyeongtaek, so much of that new infrastructure has been built by the South Koreans. And I think to some extent, burden sharing has suffered from the demagoguery that you hear from American political leaders and just not enough facts. And I suspect if the facts were out there, you would get kind of different attitudes here. But I was a little surprised that, I mean, the South Koreans know that the U.S. has been pushing for more. I'm a little surprised that the South Korean view, as you say, they don't want to do anything more in terms of even your Samsung phone objected to. So, you know, I think the South Koreans, to say they don't want to do anything more, might reflect a little sort of attitude that they're a little tired of hearing the U.S. Come every year and ask for more increases. It gets a little tiresome, and we've been doing it on a sort of year-to-year basis. I always thought if we did this on a 5-year interval, people could absorb the blow and then not think about it anymore. So I think this year-to-year issue is kind of increasing the attitude among South Koreans, and we're just sick of hearing about this issue. Finally, to keep to my 10 minutes, I'm just kind of curious. I understand this, the problems between Japan and Korea. And by the way, I thought that was very interesting on the issue of if the Japanese make a move, the majority of South Koreans want their government to make a move. But are you able statistically to get at what is it that drives this animosity among the Korean public toward Japan? It was not this way in the 80s, for example. It is this way now. Is it a function of political leadership talking about it and somehow having an effect on people's attitudes to Japan? Is it a function of the idea that awful history, let's face it, of the Japanese occupation, that awful history has been more honestly dealt with, and as people have seen how awful it was, their attitudes to Japan became much more negative. Is it a function of the fact that progressive Koreans tend to be more anti-Japanese than conservative Koreans, that progressive Koreans, since the advent of democracy, have been in a kind of ascendancy, and therefore those views about Japan, you know, it used to be expressed in Gwangju, but now it's kind of all over Korea, that those attitudes have come up just with the change in Korean polity. And the reason I'm asking this and disturbed by this, although I get it on why Koreans would support the North Koreans in the soccer game. I'm not sure about the war business, but I get it on the soccer. But I would like to see, you know, is there something we could do, the United States, to calm this down? I mean, Americans are sick of a lot of things, but one thing we're sick of is South Koreans and Japanese not getting along. I mean, and I know this is awful for South Koreans to hear, but many Americans say, gee, they're so similar. And I know those are fighting words for, so is there, in the data which explain this attitude to Japan, is there any sort of morsel of information that could lead to better policies, or that could somehow alleviate this thing that we're all getting kind of sick of? So I think those are my comments.
Those are really, really insightful and also very important issues that our guests from South Korea may want to address. Before I turn back to the Dr. Lee, Consul General Park will want to make some remarks. Whatever you want to say, 10 minutes?
Last year I was here to make my own presentation. It was about Korean Peninsula situation. This time I invited Dr. Lee in front of you because I thought his presentation would be a lot more interesting to you, as you just heard. I want to just shortly make comments with 2 points. First, as the investor here said that or answers to individual questions and public opinions and government policies are different. Answers, actually the questions are dependent on individual cases, and the answers from the respondents are only focused on the specific question on a specific issue. They don't consider many other related factors. And regarding the public opinion is made by many groups of people, but the outcome of the public survey is the answer from the individual respondents. The public opinion is formed based on certain different weight of different respondents. So, and the government policy also considers many other factors. So, when we listen here the outcomes of the public survey, we should distinguish those differences. So when some outcomes of the public questions, some answers to the questions on specific issues are quite different what I have thought. but those answers in a way would not be reflected on our government's policy as it is. My second point is that the answer to the question whether our government should increase the burden sharing for the U.S. forces in Korea is quite dramatic. I don't, in my mind, the answer does not reflect exact average people's opinion as it is. And even our government position is that we can increase our burden sharing for the U.S. forces in Korea to a reasonable extent. You know what? In my view, why the outcome was so unusual, by showing only less than 4% agreeing the increase of the Korea's burden sharing. My view is that, last year we agreed to increase Korea's burden sharing by 8.2% for DC. So for 1 year, 8.2% increase of the Korea's burden sharing. So it is not a small portion. But this time, the United States administration demand that the Korean government should increase its burden sharing by 5 times. We don't know the time span for the increase in the burden sharing yet. But the 5 times itself, I think, shocked the Korean people. And another factor is that Mr. Trump has always repeatedly said that the stationing of U.S. forces in Korea is purely for the defense of South Korea. So all the costs should be borne by the Korean government. To that perception of U.S. forces in Korea's role is not so agreeable to the Korean people. Because Korean people think that U.S. forces in Korea also contribute to the U.S. national interest or national security. And some Korean people even think that the existence of South Korea itself is to some extent is also contributing to the U.S. national interest. So there is a big perception gap between the U.S. current administration and the South Korean people. I think this is the reason why the South Korean people showed a little bit emotional response to the question, to the specific question on the South Korea's burden sharing issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are very important issues that Ambassador Hill raised. I think Council Journal answered part of that. So now let's go back to Dr. Lee, if you can answer some of those questions. And also, in your preparation, I think you prepared not only South Korea and Japan and North Korean issues, you also prepared something about South Korea, China, and Russia, if you want to also mention a little bit about those opinions.
Thank you for the very insightful comment. I think I should apologize for Ambassador Hill for we hate Japan and make your life miserable. In fact, back in 1980s and 90s, we hate Japan more, and we hate Japan less now. Yes, but there's a difference. Back in our old days, in 1980s and 90s, we were jealous of Japan. Japan was all different class of country. We were still developing country, much further than Japan. Japan is our role model, and we resented that because Japan is our enemy and we have to be like Japan. And now, in 2019, South Korea, Japan is the most frequently the visited place for the South Koreans. We love to go to Japan. We love Japanese food, and we have now Japanese living, and it's not much different from the South Korean lives. So Japan and South Korea are about the same. We have about the same way of lives. So we are not afraid of Japan. So we think, especially for the South Korean younger generations, Japan is just another friendly country. They don't have any specific reason to hate Japan, being jealous of Japan. But all the South Korean generation, they still think Japan is the more advanced, the leaders of the Asia. So that's why they hate Japan more, because they resented for Japan being better than South Korea. For the younger generation, they don't have that inferiority complex. But for the Japan, it's just the South Korea-like country, and they are they hate Japan because they believe what Japan is doing to South Korea, especially for the comfort woman issue. Now the feminism issue is very big thing in South Korea for the younger generation. And what Japan is doing with the comfort women issue is they feel, the younger generation of South Korea feel very unjust and unfair. I think that's why there's so many South Korean younger generation who believe South Korea and Japan are on the level are still angry at Japan. So overall, I think the enmity between South Korea and Japan is much less than back in the old days. So it's getting better. But with the specific issue with the trade war, it looks like it's getting worse. But I think in the deeper level, we are getting better. And is that good enough for you?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying every day like this whole thing with the intelligence sharing. I don't remember ever seeing those kinds of problems in the 80s. Maybe because the U.S. said don't do that, and nobody did that. But I mean, I'm just seeing real ruptures in the relationship. Although I agree with you. I mean, anyone who's seen all these Japanese tourists visit the sites of these Korean dramas, you know, what was it, Midnight Sonata, or Winter Sonata, you know, that was kind of nice to see. I mean, all these teary-eyed Japanese tourists seeing where, what's his name, the Korean, Baeyeonju, you know, where he walked. But it just seems politically it's much worse. Yeah.
Yes. So we hate Japan with different reasons.
And my question was, is there anything we can do to make it better? Because really, this is not helping anybody.
Yes, that part I understand, but I think the current reason is much better than all the reasons.
So we just need to wait for this lingering inferiority complex to pass.
Current enmity between South Korea and Japan can be solved with compromise and with the political level.
Okay.
And this is, we are in the university, so to talk about the academics. So it's one of the oldest questions in political science. Can a democracy make a prudent foreign policy decision making? And the answer given by the Thucydides of Plato was very negative. It's not a good idea to ask people to make foreign policy decisions. People love to hate. It's one of the irony of democracy. Democracy, people living in democracy love to go to war, to sacrifice their life for the glory of the nations. So that's why it's so dangerous to let people to decide the foreign policy. So I ask people, we have to keep U.S. forces even after the unification. People, of course, half of the Korean people think that that's not a good idea. But I don't think we have to do that. I don't think we have to let people to decide the fate of the nation, because people really don't care. They don't know about the very deepest level of the nuances, and they don't have the skills and knowledge of foreign policy making. And But we are living in democracy, and somehow we have elections. That's the key factor, right? In Korea, we have the congressional election next year, and 96% of Korean people oppose the idea of giving more money to the United States. So the President Moon Jae-in's hands are tied. If he decide to give more money, then he will fail in the next election. That's the fate of democracy. Somehow, we know that it's a very bad idea to let people to decide on policy, but somehow their will and their public opinion will be reflected on foreign policy. That's why I am doing this. But foreign policy, the public opinion, people can be persuaded, and it can be changed. So we have to find a way to persuade people, South Koreans and Americans. And I think the fundamental issue is to resetting the South Koreans' role in Korean-US alliances. Koreans and Americans, the majority of Koreans and Americans still think that Korea is protected by Americans. In fact, Koreans, we have much mightier army than North Korea. If without the nuclear weapon, South Korea doesn't have any reason to fear North Korea, the military power. We could protect ourselves without American help. So Koreans, I think that we have to find a way to persuade Koreans and Americans that Koreans is not just the protector of American power. We are working together to protect the peace and prosperity of Asian region. And we are not doing a very good job on that issue. So I think that's why we have to have this kind of meeting here to discuss that issue.
Okay, Council Chairman wants to have some comments.
Yeah, I would like to add some more regarding the Korea-Japan relations, because I was in charge of Japan matters when I was serving as Director General for Northeast Asian affairs, including Japan and China issues. So relatively, I am well aware of Korea-Japan relations and what historical issues exist between Korea and Japan. In perspective of the current Korea-Japan situation, we can change our perspective. Actually, I think our Korean government's goal of Korea-Japan relations is to move over to a better stage, more trustworthy stage. For that purpose, we should first resolve the lingering issues, which stem from the historical backgrounds. Those issues include conflict women issues and the forced labor issues. And then these issues are now being dealt with by the two governments, and so we can change our perspective on these two, on the current situation. Some people think that we are plunging into a lot worse phase of the current Korea-Japan's relationship, but I think we can change it into a efforts to move over to a better relationship between our two countries. And actually, I myself has a bright perspective of a lot better Korea-Japan relationship for the future. And this view is shared with our Foreign Ministry of Korea. So at the moment, we are focusing on solving the historical issues, but at the same time, we really hope that our two countries can continue with the substantial cooperation and the cooperation in other areas, including security areas. So the public opinion and the government policy are really different, and the outcome of individual respondents' answers are also different from public opinion and the Korean government's position. And one more thing is that after Korea unification is achieved, whether U.S. forces should continue to stay in South Korea or not. Actually, our government position is quite different from the outcome of the answers from the respondents. Last year, Korean President Moon Jae-in made public that we wish the U.S. forces in Korea can continue to stay in South Korea even after solving the North Korean nuclear issue and also beyond the unification of the Korean Peninsula. That is our current position, which is quite different from the outcome of the public survey. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you very much for those responses. I think they do a great job of explaining the issue. There's one set of questions that we really didn't get into, and I don't know if you've done it in other research, but that is South Korean attitudes to North Korea's nuclear program. Do South Koreans believe that North Korea needs nuclear weapons for their protection? Do they believe that they need them to try to urge the U.S. off the Korean Peninsula? Do they need them because of some concerns about Japan or something? What are the, how do South Koreans regard the motivation of North Koreans for having these weapons? And then finally, if North Korea were to keep the weapons, would South Korea support its own nuclear weapons program?
Yes, that's the public opinion survey is that's the tricky part. They don't know about. I don't know about what the intentions of North Korea, and if I ask the same question to the general public, probably they give the first impression of their thought, but it wouldn't mean much. Many things, but I do have some questions about their the attitude toward North Korea. One of the questions is if Kim Jong-un can be trusted as the dialogue partner. And back in April of this year, 33% or 1/3 of South Koreans says that Kim Jong-un can be trusted as a dialogue partner, which is very high because the Kim Jong-un's name, the supreme leader of North Korea's name in South Korean society is like a Voldemort. You don't dare speak up there. There is a top. Yeah, I'm not kidding. We have national security law, and we have very big resistance speaking out their names in positive way. I intentionally, purposefully used the Kim Jong-un's name when I made the item. And still, 1/3 of South Korea says that Kim Jong-un can be trusted. I think that's very high. So it was getting better, but after the failure of Hanoi, now 25%. So it's getting worse. So, but somehow 1/3 to 1/4 of South Koreans believe that it is possible to talk with Kim Jong-un with a certain level of confidence. And about the nuclear weapon, South Koreans are afraid of nuclear weapons when we ask them. But we really care about the nuclear weapon? I don't know. It's part of our lives. Of course, if someone asks that North Korean nuclear weapon is a serious problem, they will say yes. The answer is in the question. But when, as a South Korean citizens, the North Korean nuclear weapon is influencing every aspect of my lives, I don't think so. We are kind of immune to the impact. So it's not that we don't care about the North Korean nuclear threat, but you cannot live always thinking about the threat. So yes, that's why the isolation is in my research is growing. They just try not to think about it because it's so taxing.
Okay, so now the floor is open. We have a microphone there. If you have questions, you can go to the microphone. It'll go to the microphone. This is our alumni from Japan. he just arrived from Japan to Denver. So we'll see how.
I hope right.
Thank you very much. I'm an alumni of this school, graduated 22 years ago. And currently working as a professor of international relations in Japan. Just happened to be here yesterday and today only, and leaving for Canada tomorrow. So I'm actually really happy to be here today. Well, two questions to Professor Lee. One is, you mentioned about the variety of kind of opinions, public opinion in Korea. And of course, realism, pragmatism, isolationism. Well, of course, I agree to that. Well, but I guess that usually taking a look at the ideas and public opinions, which might be different from, of course, the governmental ideas. And taking distinction between the opinions of experts on security and the ideas of the public opinions, these are not necessarily the same. So, well, if you say a variety of things regarding public opinions in South Korea, well, probably Kim Jong-un, doesn't care about that. So I guess that probably taking a look at the side of North Korea, well, many of the issues that you mentioned, kind of the variety of opinions, well, do you think that Kim Jong-un cares about that? Probably the answer would be no. That's my first question.
Can you repeat the last part? I didn't catch that.
Well, so how do you think about, of course, if you give variety of public opinions to Kim Jong-un, what do you think about Kim Jong-un would respond to your ideas? That's my question. Second, Korea-Japan relations. As an expert of security, I think that the GSOM is very significant and should be maintained. Whatever the situations are happening actually between South Korea and Japan, well, that must be actually different from the public opinion. We have to actually stand on the point of the experts. Well, you mentioned about kind of importance of the pragmatists in the public opinion of South Korea. Why do you think about the kind of the importance of the pragmatists and that these kind of pragmatic opinions regarding relations with the Japanese? Well, you mentioned a lot of things, of course, but I have completely opposite opinions, but I'm not going to say about that. But I guess that we have to stand kind of more pragmatic and kind of more, expert in the kind of security of the country-to-country bilateral relations. I think that probably more pragmatic way of actually initiating the talks and then getting into the substance of the confusion. And then probably gradually trying to find out the compromise, the way to make a resolution of bilateral relations. That's probably the thing that the experts have to do. We cannot actually disseminate ideas, public opinions. Of course, the South Koreans hate Japanese, but vice versa is also possible. But it's probably nonsense for us to say that kind of thing at this time because just getting the bilateralists more confused. It's better for us to actually stand a kind of more pragmatic stance and trying to look for more solvency. That's probably the pragmatic idea. What do you think about my views? Thank you.
Okay, so normally would not allow for that long questions, but because this is important, so I not let him to ask that question. Brooke, let's take two questions before we.
Try to make it shorter. America doesn't want Chinese boots on in Canada, and I've heard that China doesn't want American boots in North Korea on its borders. I found your talk fascinating, the opinion, but how much of that is really going to be guided by what China wants?
Okay, so
First of all, I'm an expert on public opinion. I don't know nothing about unification of North Korea. I work for the Korea Institute for National Unification. That means that if we do actual unification, I'm the person who lose my job. So. Just kidding. Yes, public, as I told you, we shouldn't ask public to decide the foreign policy, and we have to find a way. It is expert and policymakers' job to find the compromise, the compromise way to have the cooperation between Korea and South Korea. I think that's the very definition of pragmatism, and we should find a way. If you ask my opinion on that question, yes, of course, I think we have to work with Japan. But President Moon Jae-in used to be a human rights lawyer, and with North Korea, we have human rights issues, and we have to maintain the consistency about the stance of the human rights. If we have to question about the North Korean human rights issues, and we have to question about the human rights of the combating human and the first breaker. And the pragmatism is very important between the two nations, but we cannot ignore the basic human values and the human rights. And South Korea is a democratic country, and we cannot ignore the procedural justice and human rights. And we have to find a way to satisfy two goals, the pragmatism and the human rights. And there is a way, I think, but we have to weighed out the violent burst of sentiment in two countries. So let's give us some time to cool out our heels, and then we will find some way. So just wait, and time will give us. And the next question about the China and Japan, I honestly don't know. China is not in Canada, but America is in South Korea. That's the difference. And China and Canada is just hypothetical possibility, but the presence of the United States in Korean position is real. I think that's a very different distinction.
Oh, Ambassador or whatever. If
Regarding the GSOMIA issue, this is being handled by the Korean government. So I feel obligatory to make some comments on that question. Actually, the GSOMIA is going to expire as of November 23rd, 2nd or 3rd. Korea was hugely shocked, tremendously shocked by seeing the large-scale economic retaliatory measures taken by Japan. The current conundrum arose based on the Korea's Supreme Court's ruling on civilian case. Actually, that was a civil case where the victims of forced labor filed a lawsuit at the Korea's Supreme Court against the wartime Japanese companies who hired those Korean laborers. So basically, this is a civil case, and the ruling was not welcomed by the Japanese government. But anyway, the Korean government have never expected the Japanese government will take a large-scale, very threatening economic measures against South Korea. Two steps of economic retaliatory measures were taken by the Japanese government. So, and the cause for those retaliatory measures was based on Japanese distrust of South Korea in security perspective. The Japanese government figure officials said that Korea is not trustworthy in terms of security. So that comment also upset the Korean people, including the Korean governments. That if Japan took such measures harmful to the Korean government economy and Korean economy and the Korean national interest on the perspective of securities, then we cannot also trust Japan from the same perspective, which involves the agreement to protect the military information sharing between our two countries. So it's, there has been some escalatory process between our two countries. But now our governments are trying to find solutions to this situation.
Okay, two more questions there.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Lee and also Ambassador Hill, if you wouldn't both mind responding to it. I think the approach was amazing and interesting to ask about the soccer match because it gets at natural affiliations and affections without being necessarily political. But I'm wondering whether there's, to some degree, in the sports arena, maybe some domination fatigue on U.S. success, and in a sports-related question, do you think that plays into it? Ambassador Hill, you've had, I know, diverse appointments in the State Department. Did you encounter that maybe even in Europe, that people are just kind of tired of the U.S. succeeding, and even as something as serious as war engagement, that would be a factor in it?
Okay, then Bill, let's take two questions. You done?
I am done.
Okay, so next.
Okay.
My question is for Dr. Lee, and I'm just interested in generational differences in your categories of realists, pragmatists, isolationists, liberals. My guess would be that the realists would tend to be an older cohort in the South Korean population, and the liberals and isolationists would be younger cohorts. Was that your finding, and do you find any significance in that divergence between different generations?
Okay, so who'll go first?
Okay, well, I'll pick up on the sports issue. Really, it's not quite on the Korea-Japan thing, but you know, look, I think there's been a culture in our country for some years where when you score a touchdown, you don't just hand the ball to the referee, you go through an entire ritualized taunting exercise, the result of which, I think, is to make people a little tired of us. And I think as a culture, we should maybe rethink this. Those sort of chants of USA, look, I always, 100% supported our teams in the Olympics, but sometimes we ought to just speak a little more softly. I always remember, to switch the metaphor a little, I was in the Balkans, in this tiny little country of Macedonia, now called North Macedonia, and I remember we had a general come in, General Hugh Shelton, and the issue was the question of our configuring forces for the eventual attack on the Serbs. And Shelton is about 6'6", and he spoke to the Macedonians in the quietest, most respectful tone. And I remember, we walked out, and I turned to Shelton, or I arched my neck to talk to Shelton, and I said, that was really very effective, the way you did that. And he said, that's what happens when you're 6'6". And I just think as a country, we need to do a lot better job and stop this taunting and this endless bragging, which now is combined with this sense of victimhood, when frankly we're not victims at all. So I think it's good diplomacy to tone it down, and to be frank with you, I think we're going through the worst of it right now.
Okay, Dr. Lee.
Yes, the first question about the U.S. success in soccer. Really?
Sports.
Yes. U.S. female soccer team is dominating the world, but I'm afraid to say the U.S. male soccer team is not. So, but I think that question is really about anti-Americanism in Korean society. Back in 1988, there was an Olympics in Seoul. I'm not sure if you know this episode. There was a basketball match between the USSR and the US. And the South Koreans supported USSR. That was very shocking to South Korea. We didn't know why. But it was right after the Korean democratization in 1987. After that, there was some surge of anti-Americanism in South Korean society, and it continues late 1990s and early 2000s. And still, I know that many American colleagues are worried about the anti-Americanism in Korean society. But as the public opinion expert, I don't see any prominent evidence for the remnant of anti-Americanism in Korean society. That's old news now, so you don't have to worry about that. About the generational differences about how they feel about North Korea, you are mostly right, but the liberalism is most prominent among the South Koreans in their 30s and 40s. They are the most progressive generation. The isolationists, the 20s. The realists, over 50s and 60s. So there are some differences, but every generation has some parts of each of the four groups. That would be my answer.
With that, let's conclude today's panel discussion. I think we touched upon some very, very important issues and also very controversial issues. These are very enlightenment, I think, for the community and for ourselves. We all learned from this. You can see we have a very good conversation, not only kind of lecture or speeches conversation. We have an ambassador here, we have a council journal here, we have the expert from South Korea here on this important issue. We also have an alumni from Japan to join this conversation. I think this is very, very helpful and very useful. And the DU quarter is going to end very soon, next week. This is week 9. How fast the quarter goes, we cannot imagine. So our event for this quarter will be concluded. This was last event from China Center for this quarter. We have more events in the fall, so look for our announcements. And 2 big events for next year, China Center has. One is our annual dinner. We honor honorees, which will be announced very soon. The second big event for next year is that our China Center is the host of the American Association of China Studies. We have a lot of scholars from all over the country and also from Asia. In fact, quite a few people from Asia will come, from other parts of the world will come to join us. So look for our announcements. There should be very interesting conversations and also panel discussions. Please join me to thank Ambassador here, Council Journal, and Dr. Lee for their very, very interesting presentation. Thank you, and enjoy the nice mountain weather.